Hello there. I am going to start a new book called Flat Stanley, His Original Adventure. And it is by Jeff Brown, and he has written many versions of Flat Stanley. Flat Stanley has gone on so many adventures. That's why you may have received a flat teacher in the mail, or you will be, and you get to take your teacher on an adventure. So I'm going to read the first chapter of the book. All right, Flat Stanley, His Original Adventure. All right, here's the first picture. I wonder if that's Stanley. Chapter 1, The Big Bulletin Board. Breakfast was ready. I will go wake the boys, Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their younger son Arthur called from the bedroom he shared with his brother, Stanley. Hey, come and look! Hey! Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people, Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. Try to remember that. Excuse me, Arthur said, but look. He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he could still have been sleeping if he had not been woken by his brother's shout. What's going on here? He called out cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. Heavens, said Mrs. Lambchop. Gosh, said Arthur. Stanley's flat. So right here's the bulletin board that fell on him, and now he is flat. So that was Arthur, not Stanley. As a pancake, said Mr. Lambchop. Darndest thing I've ever seen. Let's all have breakfast, Mrs. Lambchop said. Then Stanley and I will go see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. How do you feel? He asked. Does it hurt very much? Well, I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up, Stanley Lambchop said, but I feel fine now. Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases, said Dr. Dan. We'll just have to keep an eye on you. So here's Dr. Dan and Flat Stanley. He said when he had finished the examination, sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know. Mrs. Lambchop said she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor. A tailor is someone who sews. So Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about a foot wide, and just an inch thick. So there you can see that he's not very thick. And that is the end of the first chapter. So the next chapter is called Being Flat. I want you to think about what would it be like if you were flat as a pancake like Stanley. Think about that.